Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we're heading straight into the blazing desert of New Mexico. Picture this, it's February 2009. A woman is out walking her dog along the dusty barren edge of Albuquerque, nothing unusual, just another dry windy day in the desert. Her dog runs off, nose to the ground, tail wagging like he's found treasure. Except what he's found isn't a rabbit, or a stick, or even an old boot. No. He sniffed out a human bone. And not just one bone. Before we unravel this nightmare, drop your location in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? I love seeing just how far these mysteries travel. Now, when police arrive, they uncover something far darker. What begins as a single discovery turns into one of the most horrifying true crime scenes in American history, a mass grave scattered across the West Mesa desert. Over the course of days, investigators dig and piece together a chilling reality: 11 women, all murdered, their remains hidden in shallow graves. Let that sink in. 11. This isn't some ancient burial site. This isn't a horror movie. This is 2009. This is real life. And if you think that's the most shocking part, oh no! Because here's the twist, to this very day, more than a decade later, no one has ever been caught. What do you think so far? Do you believe this was the work of one serial killer, or something even more disturbing? Drop your thoughts below, and don't forget to hit like and subscribe if this story already has your heart racing. The discovery was nicknamed the Bone Collector case by the media, but don't let that title fool you. It almost sounds like a Hollywood thriller, doesn't it? The kind of movie where the bad guy gets caught in the final act, dragged away in handcuffs, justice served with dramatic music. But in reality, this story doesn't have that kind of neat ending. Instead, what Albuquerque got was a graveyard in its backyard, and a mystery so deep, it still gnaws at the city's conscience. Investigators found the bodies of 11 women and one unborn child. Most of them were young, many involved in drugs and sex work. And here's where the irony cuts deep: society barely noticed when these women vanished. They were seen as disposable. Their disappearances hardly made the news at the time. But suddenly, when their bones surfaced together in the desert, everyone wanted answers. Suddenly, their lives mattered. It's almost like people didn't care about the missing until they became headlines. Tragic, isn't it? But for the families of these women, this wasn't just a crime scene. It was the confirmation of their worst nightmares. Mothers, sisters, children, they had been searching, begging, hoping someone would listen. Instead, their daughters' names were added to a list of victims of what appears to be one of America's most elusive serial killers. Let's step back and set the scene here. The West Mesa Desert, where the bodies were found, isn't some isolated, untouched wasteland. It's not far from busy neighborhoods, from homes, from roads people drive every single day. And yet, this burial ground sat there, quietly holding its secret, as life carried on around it. Almost as if the desert itself had been complicit, covering up for the killer all these years. And the question that immediately haunted investigators, and still haunts everyone who studies this case, is terrifyingly simple. How does someone bury 11 women in the same place without anyone noticing? Think about that for a second. 11 lives ended. 11 bodies carried into the desert. 11 shallow graves dug by someone who clearly had time, confidence, and the terrifying audacity to believe they'd never be caught. Spoiler alert, they were right. Now here's where the story gets darker. The victims weren't random. They weren't chosen out of the blue. Many of them were young women connected to drugs, sex work, or vulnerable lifestyles. To some, this might sound like they were easy targets. But to me, and I'm guessing to you too, it sounds like they were human beings, people with names, with families, with dreams. People who should have been protected, not discarded. And yet, in Albuquerque during the mid-2000s, dozens of women like this were going missing. Police were aware of the disappearances, but, and here's the bitter irony, the cases rarely gained traction. You see, society has a nasty habit of labeling some lives as less important. Missing college student from a good neighborhood? Front page. Missing woman with a record or addiction? File it under low priority. Until, of course, the bones pile up in the desert. If you're still with me, and I know you are, because this story is unreal, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the rest of this chilling case. We're only scratching the surface, and trust me, it gets even darker. When the West Mesa burial site was first uncovered, investigators scrambled. The FBI, local police, and countless volunteers scoured the desert, searching for every clue. They found jewelry, clothing fragments, evidence markers littered the sand as if the desert itself had become a massive outdoor crime lab. But here's the kicker, despite the massive investigation, despite the national headlines, and despite the pressure to solve one of the most horrifying serial murders in modern history, the killer has never been found. That's right. No arrests. No charges. Just speculation, theories, and endless frustration. Some believed it was the work of a single predator, someone who knew the city's underbelly well, maybe even someone the women trusted. Others feared it could have been multiple killers, operating within the dangerous world of Albuquerque's drug and sex trade. But with every year that passes, the mystery only deepens. Stay tuned because this is just the discovery. Next, we'll dive into the lives of these women, the overlooked cries for help, and the haunting irony of how society failed them long before their bones were unearthed. So stick around. Because this case? It doesn't just keep you awake at night. It makes you rethink everything you thought you knew about safety, justice, and whose lives really matter. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't done so yet. Your support and encouragement helps us to bring more hidden and forgotten stories back to light. Before we move further, let's pause for a moment. When you hear about serial killers and their victims, how often do the names of the victims actually stick with you? Usually, it's the killer who gets remembered, splashed across documentaries, headlines, even podcasts. But the women of the West Mesa case? They deserve more than being footnotes in someone else's nightmare. So tonight, we're going to bring them out of the shadows. And as we do, tell me in the comments, do you think society really pays equal attention to all missing persons? Or are some stories conveniently ignored until it's too late? I'll be reading your thoughts. Here's what makes this case so gut-wrenching. The victims weren't faceless statistics. They were real people. Daughters. Sisters. Mothers. Women who, for 1,000 different reasons, ended up vulnerable, but none of them deserved what happened. The 11 identified victims were Jamie Barella, just 15 years old. Yes, 15. She was last seen walking with her cousin in 2004. She never came home. Evelyn Salazar, Jamie's cousin, only 27, who vanished the same day. 2 lives stolen at once. Virginia Cloven, 23. She dreamed of moving to Colorado and starting fresh. Instead, her bones ended up buried in the desert. Cinnamon Elks, 32, a mother of 5. She was described as funny, loving, and loyal. Her disappearance barely registered in the news. Victoria Chavez, 26, who had already been reported missing years before the discovery. And others, Doreen Marquez, Julie Nieto, Monica Candelaria, Veronica Romero, Michelle Valdez, and Michelle's unborn child. 11 names. 11 lives. Yet for years, when their families begged police to investigate, when they pleaded for help, their cases were ignored or brushed aside. The irony? Once their remains were found, suddenly they were newsworthy. Suddenly the city cared. Think about the double standard here. If 11 wealthy women vanished from the suburbs, do you think it would have taken years before anyone noticed? Of course not. There'd be helicopters in the sky, SWAT teams on standby, and every politician within 500 miles holding press conferences. But because these women were poor, often involved in drugs or sex work, their disappearances barely made a ripple. It's almost like society whispered, "Well, what did you expect?" That's the cruelest part. The women were failed long before they were murdered. If you believe every life deserves equal attention, no matter someone's background, hit that like button and subscribe. It might seem small, but it tells me you stand for the voices that were silenced. Now, here's where the story twists deeper. Many of these women actually knew each other. Albuquerque street culture in the mid-2000s wasn't huge, and people in vulnerable circles often crossed paths. Some of the women were friends. Others had family connections. This wasn't just 11 random people plucked from thin air. It was a pattern, a network of lives intersecting, disappearing, and, years later, resurfacing in shallow graves. Police later admitted they were aware of an unusual number of missing women during those years. But nothing was done. No task force. No serious manhunt. Just quiet files piling up on a desk, gathering dust. And when the bones were finally uncovered in 2009, suddenly, officers started connecting the dots. But by then, the killer had long since vanished into the shadows. Here's the part that makes your skin crawl. Some families claim they knew something was wrong for years. They reported the disappearances. They begged for help. But they were told things like, "She's probably on a binge," or "She'll turn up eventually." Imagine being a mother, certain that your daughter didn't just walk away, only to be dismissed by the very people who are supposed to protect her. And then, years later, discovering your child in the desert. That's not just tragedy. That's negligence dressed up as inevitability. And yet, through all this horror, the victims' families fought to keep their memories alive. They held vigils. They pushed for answers. They refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. Some of them even called out the media directly. One family member bitterly joked during a press interview, "Well, at least now that they've been found, everyone suddenly cares." That sarcastic sting? It cuts right to the truth. If you're still watching, and I know you are, because this case is unbelievable, make sure you're subscribed. We're going to pull back the curtain on the suspects, the theories, and the chilling possibility that the killer was hiding in plain sight. Because here's the thing, these women weren't killed in a vacuum. Somebody lured them, somebody murdered them, and somebody thought they could get away with it. Even though they did. Let's start with a chilling thought. What if the person responsible for burying 11 women in the desert wasn't some faceless monster lurking in the dark, but someone who blended into everyday life? A neighbor. A coworker. A man you'd never look twice at in the grocery store. That's the unsettling truth of the West Mesa case. The prime suspects weren't strangers. They were familiar names in Albuquerque. Before I get into the theories, let me ask you this. Do you think killers are usually strangers hiding in the shadows, or people already within arm's reach of their victims? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know what you think. Now, the name that comes up again and again is Lorenzo Montoya. Montoya lived not far from the West Mesa burial site. And his background? Disturbing doesn't even cover it. He had a documented history of violence against women, particularly sex workers. He was known to solicit them, lure them to his home, and attack them. Police had multiple reports. Multiple red flags. But somehow, he remained free. Here's where it gets darker. In 2006, 3 years before the bones were discovered, Montoya was killed by the boyfriend of a woman he had lured into his home. The boyfriend shot him in self-defense after Montoya attempted to strangle her. So why is Montoya so heavily suspected? Because after his death in 2006, the string of disappearances in Albuquerque abruptly stopped. Think about that. For years, women kept vanishing. And then, suddenly, silence. Coincidence? Or did the bone collector get stopped not by police, not by detectives, but by another victim's desperate fight to survive? But Montoya isn't the only shadow in this story. Another chilling name, Joseph Blee, often called the mid-school rapist. Yes, that's what locals nicknamed him. And it's as horrifying as it sounds. In the 1980s, Blee was linked to multiple rapes in Albuquerque. His crimes continued into the 1990s, and he had a long history of violence against women. Police later admitted that when they searched his home, they found jewelry and personal items belonging to sex workers. Some items looked eerily like trophies. Trophies from victims who never came home. While Blee was never charged in connection to the West Mesa murders, the circumstantial evidence is enough to make your skin crawl. Could he have been the one burying women under the desert moonlight? Then there are the whispers about a sex trafficking ring. Some investigators believe that the disappearances weren't the work of a lone predator but of an organized group exploiting vulnerable women. After all, Albuquerque was, and still is, a corridor for trafficking due to its highways and location. But here's the problem: evidence was thin. And without concrete proof, this theory faded into the background, leaving Montoya and Blee as the names most people point to when they think of the West Mesa Bone Collector. What makes this part of the story so haunting is the irony. Police had suspects. They had histories of violence. They had circumstantial evidence. And yet, to this day, nobody has been officially charged. 11 women, buried in the desert like trash, and still, no one has been held accountable. If this frustrates you as much as it frustrates me, let me know in the comments. Who do you think is most likely responsible, Montoya, Blee, or someone else entirely? And don't forget to like and subscribe, because your support ensures stories like this are never forgotten. Imagine living in Albuquerque in 2009. You wake up to headlines announcing that 11 bodies have been unearthed from the desert on the city's edge. 11 women, mothers, daughters, gone. Fear spread like wildfire. Parents looked twice at their children. Women walking alone at night clutched their keys a little tighter. And for the families of the missing, the discovery wasn't closure, it was confirmation of their worst nightmares. But here's the kicker: the case wasn't solved then, and it still isn't solved today. Authorities announced the victims were primarily women involved in sex work or struggling with addiction. Vulnerable. Forgotten by most. And yet, loved deeply by their families. Mothers like Evelyn Salazar's mom, who once begged police to take her daughter's disappearance seriously. Daughters like Veronica Romero, who vanished at just 27 years old. Each name was more than a statistic. They were lives erased. And what did Albuquerque get in return? A nickname that still chills the city: the West Mesa Bone Collector. It sounds like the title of a horror film. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. Police poured resources into the investigation, but leads dried up quickly. Montoya was dead. Blee was behind bars for other crimes. And the trafficking theory lacked evidence. To this day, the case remains open, a file full of unanswered questions. Here's where irony cuts deepest. The land where the graves were discovered, it was being cleared for housing development. That means if construction had started just a few months earlier, bulldozers would have paved over the graves. 11 women, erased a second time, hidden forever under concrete. Think about that. This case wasn't solved by skill, or by diligence, or even by justice. It was solved by accident. By a real estate project. So where does that leave us? With questions that gnaw at the bones of this story. If Montoya was the killer, why didn't police connect the dots earlier? If it was Blee, why wasn't stronger evidence uncovered? If it was trafficking, why has no one been brought to trial? And the most chilling question of all, what if the real bone collector was never even on the radar? What do you think? Is this case the work of one man, or was it bigger than that? Let me know in the comments, your theories matter here. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button and help us reach 10,000 subscribers so we can keep bringing these hidden stories to light. For the families, time has not healed. Each year that passes without answers feels like a betrayal. Their daughters deserve justice, and yet the silence grows louder. The desert still holds its secrets. And somewhere, buried in those secrets, is the truth about the West Mesa Bone Collector. Because here's the reality: justice delayed isn't just justice denied. It's justice buried. If this story left you shaken, you're not alone. Share your thoughts below, and while you're here, subscribe so you don't miss the next case we unravel. Because some stories refuse to stay buried, and it's our job to make sure they don't.